The double entry principles. The double entry principles states that for every debit entry, there must be a corresponding credit entry, and vice versa. That for every credit entry, there must be a corresponding debit entry. This means that for every receiver, there must be a giver, and for every giver, there must be a receiver. Accordingly, we debit the receiver and credit the giver. Let's take an illustration to demonstrate our knowledge of the double entry principle before we go into the recalculation. Illustration. In 2021, January 1st, Mr. Victory started business with cash of $3,000. January 2nd, paid rent $700. January 3, purchased goods for cash $2,000. January 4, sold goods for cash $1,500. You are required to show how these transactions will appear in the books of Mr. Victory. To demonstrate the concept of double entry principles, we have taken a short question in relation to cash account. The cash account is an account that records only cash transactions. It does this by debiting all cash received and crediting all cash paid out. This means that any transaction that does not involve cash can never be recorded in the cash account. Now, if you look at the illustration, the four questions centers on cash. Therefore, we are going to open a cash account. Remember that if you are dealing with rent or recording rent, you will open a rent account. And if you are dealing with salaries, payment of salaries, you will open a salary account. Also, if you are dealing with purchases, you will open a purchases account. And if you are dealing with sales, you must open a sales account. Any transaction that you are dealing with should have its own account, which must have the debit and the credit side. Therefore, to answer this short question, we are going to open the cash account and other relevant accounts in respect of this question. Now, let's open the cash account first. In respect of these transactions, we are expected to open the cash account. If you watch the transactions, Mr. Victory started business with cash. Cash is involved. Paid rent, $700. Cash is involved. Purchased goods for cash. Cash is involved. Sold goods for cash. Cash is involved. Now it means that the cash account is involved in all the transactions. And that is why we are opening the cash account. Now we have opened cash account for for Mr. Victory, the owner of the business. We already know that this is the ruling of the ledger. The date, particulars, folio amount on the debit side, the date, particulars, folio amount on the credit side. This side is the debit side, while this side is the credit side. Now, all cash that Mr. Victory receives will be recorded on the debit side, while all cash that Mr. Victory paid out will be posted to the credit side. Now, this account belongs to Mr. Victory, and usually it is the cashier that takes care of the cash account. What the cashier does is that anytime cash is coming in, the cashier receives the cash and debits it, and writes the transaction involved here, and the date involved here, and the amount involved here. Anytime that the cashier is paying out cash for any transaction, the cashier credits this account, writes the date of the transaction, the type of transaction, and writes the amount. And of course, any folio number will be written here as well as here. This is how the cash account is organized. The other account that we are going to open in these transactions will be the capital account, the rent account, the purchases account, and the sales account. Now, as we are progressing, we shall make more explanations on why and how entries are recorded in these other accounts. Of course, these other accounts are minor. If you watch the rulings of these accounts, they are not like this. There are no headings. You can also write the headings if you want, but for examination purposes, these methods are always adopted for the sake of time. So whenever you see a ruling like this, it means you have opened an account, just in form of cross. Once you write any name on top, it automatically becomes the account. So we now have the Victory cash account. Of course, we have written the name of Victory on top, entity concept, which means that Victory is the owner of the business. The cash account is not being controlled by Victory. The Victory we are writing here is just showing the entity concept, the owner of the business. The cash account is controlled by the cashier. You can also see that we have opened the capital account. The capital account. We have also opened the purchases account, the rent account, and the sales account. In the same way, you can write any name. Assuming we are dealing with traveling expenses, by writing traveling expenses on top, it automatically becomes traveling expenses account. So when you hear open an account, it is just to rule a line in form of cross, one side being the debit, while the other side being the credit. That is what you do, and automatically it represents the account that the name has been written. The question reads that on January 1st, 2021, Mr. Victory started business with cash of $3,000. Now, I will not apply the double entry concept at once. I will adopt a single entry approach for the sake of clarity. Remember, we are still in our foundation stage. Now, we're going to be looking at it from the point of view of the cashier. Let's take, for instance, that I'm the cashier of this company, and you take yourself as the cashier of this company. Now, you have opened the cash account, and your function as the cashier is to receive cash and debit the cash account, and to pay out cash and credit the cash account. So for you, the debit represents addition or plus, while the credit represents subtraction or minus. Now, the owner of the business comes to start the business, it is only the cashier that has the function of receiving cash and paying out cash. It is not the function of the owner of the business, except he decides to become the cashier of his business. If the owner of the business starts a business, he brings in cash or check so that the business starts. Now, at this point, he's bringing in cash of $3,000. And who holds the cash? The cashier. Now, he gives cashier the money to hold so that the business starts. The question you ask yourself as the person keeping this account is very simple. Now that the owner of the business is bringing cash to me, am I receiving cash or am I paying out cash? Receiving cash or am I paying out cash? The answer is I'm receiving cash. At this point that I, the cashier, has recognized that I'm receiving cash, what do? I debit the cash account, because the law says anytime I'm receiving, my account should be what? Debited. So you put yourself in the position that this business belongs to you and that the transactions relate to your own business. Since you are the cashier and you are receiving cash of $3,000 from the owner of the business, what do? You debit the cash book. So we go on and do that now. On 2021 January 1st, cashier received $3,000 from the owner of the business, represented by capital. Remember that the owner of the business is Victory, but the amount that the owner of the business uses in starting a business is called capital. The cashier received $3,000 from who? From the source, capital. You may be tempted to write Mr. Victory here as the source of the receipt. No. The amount that the owner of the business uses in starting the business is called capital. So capital is representing Mr. Victory. And the amount was received on January 1st, 2021 from capital. And the amount involved is $3,000. There are no entries of folio because the question did not state any folio number. So in any transaction or in any question, what you ask yourself as a student or as a learner is, at this point, am I receiving cash or am I paying out cash? If you are receiving cash, then with your hand you can just demonstrate. That means debit. And if you demonstrate this way with your hand, that means credit. So at this point, we have debited because we received money from the owner of the business. The second transaction, January 2nd, reads, January 2nd, paid rent $700. I now ask myself, I'm the cashier and I'm in the custody of receiving cash and paying out cash. So now that my organization is to pay rent, it is my responsibility as a person holding the money to pay such rent. So at this point of paying rent, am I receiving cash or am I paying out cash? So at this point, we are paying out rent, and since we are giving out cash for the rent, what do? So we credit the cash account with rent.